Please note, the following stories contain very graphic and disturbing content, including experimentation on a child and the elderly. Viewer discretion is advised. The era was sometime during the Cold War. Soviet Russia and America were competing for the upper edge by all means, mostly in the field of nuclear weapons. There were also reports of biological weapons designed to help win the war, yet none of them saw action in any of the conflicts. The reason behind this was an incident that happened in a cold town in the north of Russia. The facility was brand new, ordered to be constructed during the World War by Stalin himself. It was the most advanced one of its kind, created for one purpose, and for one purpose alone: biological weapons testing. Built mostly underground, it reached 10 floors down and was isolated to avoid giving off heat signatures. The surrounding area was monitored down to the smallest branch, so nothing could get in or out unnoticed. One day, the facility received orders of the highest sort. The Russian spies in America had just found out that America was working on a new biological weapon. They received no further information, since they already knew what Command wanted them to do. They wanted them to beat America to it, and come up with something of their own. The 3 teams of scientists that were stationed at the facility went to work. Every team had their own project. Team 1 created the project OLX-17, a flesh-eating bacteria that was able to travel by air. Team 2 created the project AKG-9, a virus that replicated itself in the host's bloodstream, causing strokes. The last team created the project K3, a virus that was supposed to slowly kill the brain functions one by one. Time passed, and the projects were cancelled one by one, until the only project left was K3. They now thought that they had come far enough to test the virus, so the scientists told Command that it was now ready for testing. Instead of the usual animal testings, they were ordered to do human testing. The scientists were unwilling at first, but they eventually gave in after Command reminded them that traitors would be shot. The test subjects were mostly male, most of them between 20 and 30 years of age, but there was also a child at the age of 6, and an old woman at the age of 80. The scientists were still very resentful of the whole idea of human testing, especially when there was a child involved, but since they all feared for their lives, they decided to carry on. In the beginning, the results were looking good. The first 4 patients had been infected, and, as expected, had died a few days later. It was only after a couple of weeks that problems started to emerge. The men started to say information about the scientists right before they died, information that was impossible for them to know. The scientists didn't know how to categorize this, but they tried to carry on as best they could. As time crept by, the number of subjects were steadily decreasing, until the only ones left were the child and the old woman. The scientists decided to experiment on the child first, to spare him of the pain of being alone. After injecting the child with the virus, his body reacted in a strange way. He had severe seizures and was crying in pain until one of the guards couldn't stand it anymore, pulled out his sidearm, placed it to the child's head, and pulled the trigger. The testing was put to a temporary hold since they didn't want the same thing to happen to their last subject. Just before testing was supposed to resume, they were stopped again, this time by the disappearing of a guard. They contacted Command and reported the situation, but were told that the guard had probably just defected, and to carry on with the experiments. As instructed, the scientists infected the old lady and waited to see the symptoms. She slowly started to fall ill as her brain was basically shutting down. Yet, after a few days, it just stopped. She just sat there in her room without saying a word. The scientists contacted Command again and reported what was going on. They were told that the experiments were a success, and that they should take the woman to the morgue and shoot her. A firing squad of 8 soldiers took the woman to the morgue, but none of them returned. They were just gone. When the facility's shock troops arrived at the morgue, they only saw the woman. No sign of the soldiers that entered with her. As the soldiers stood there, wondering what had transpired, the woman slowly spun her head around until it faced the complete wrong direction. Then, she looked up at the soldiers and said, "Some things were not meant for man to alter." She then started to have a seizure. However, unlike the child, she was quiet. One of the soldiers pulled out his Kalashnikov and quickly put an end to her. Now, the scientists were very concerned. They didn't know what to do in this situation, since obviously this was not something that happened often. They once again decided to report it in. However, command took no notice of it. Some weeks after the woman's death, things started to happen again at the facility. Soldiers and guards just disappeared into thin air, never to be seen again. The scientists kept calling in to command, but command continued to not believe them. Then, one day, they found one of the soldiers, bloody and missing a big part of his head. This was the same man that had shot the child. Not only that, but on his chest, there were small, bloody handprints. Everybody was panicking at this point. There were reports from scientists saying that they had seen subjects walking around, but when they followed them, they just disappeared. To calm the situation, a soldier was told to check the morgue to see that all the bodies from the subjects were there. It didn't help matters much, since when he came back, he was pale and muttering short words like, "Impossible. How?" And most of all, "Gone." The facility broke into a state of chaos. People were now disappearing left and right, yet command still refused to believe the reports. One day, command started getting weird reports. Short messages just stating things like, "Gone. They're gone." And, "They're coming for us." Then one day, they received a message saying, "They just won't die." After that, the radio went blank. No message, nothing. Command decided to send 8 Spetsnaz units to investigate. After a few days, a single man returned. His face was white, and he had bite marks all over his upper body. When he was asked to report, he simply said, "They just won't die." When asked who, he stared back at the interrogator and said, "The people, led by that child." Command immediately bombed the site and burned it. A month later, a secret treaty between America and the Soviets was signed, saying that all biological and biochemical warfare was prohibited. Now, the old facility lays buried under many tons of rocks, along with all those who didn't escape. To the families of Sean Davis, Alan Olson, and Jeff Parker, first, let me say that I apologize. Nonetheless, I will track down Montgomery, and he will pay for the atrocities he committed. I'm not going to keep you all in the dark either. However, there are certain details that I must leave out, for security reasons. All the vital information will be filed in this report, however. Let me start by saying that Barnabas Montgomery was a psychopath. He may have had a PhD in biochemistry with a minor in anatomy, but he was still a psychopath. The man had a demeanor about him that nobody could bear for more than a few minutes at a time. He was pale, like someone who never left his house. He was skinny too, and had piercing blue eyes. His gray-white hair was long and wavy, so much so that Alan called him Howard Hughes behind his back. At any rate, I'll begin my tale. It all started a week after we graduated. Sean, Alan, Jeff, and I. We had been friends since junior year at high school, and we ended up taking the same types of classes all the way up until we finished at university. We all received a master's degree in different fields of science. Alan got his in physics, Jeff's in chemistry, Sean's in anatomy and physiology, and mine in biology. It was at our celebration dinner, roughly a week later, that the man in his long black coat approached us. He had apparently been looking for recent graduates who could assist him in an experiment, which he left very vague in his proposition. He offered a fairly handsome payment, so we agreed to his offer. If only we had known what was to come. The first thing he asked for was a liquid state of potassium, chlorine, sodium, and boron. This was the job he gave to Jeff. Alan was asked to conduct the experiment, which entailed dropping 2 tablets of uranium-238 into the mixture, which would cause them to form a gaseous state. Sean and I were given the most disturbing job. We were tasked with getting a cadaver and removing all of its internal organs. This included the brain and the eyes. At this point, we were beginning to question our choice of working with this lunatic. The day for the experiment was slowly arriving. The cadaver, sewn up without any organs, was laid onto a circular table in the center of a room with a metal grate on the floor for the circulation of the strange gas. Montgomery had purchased an underground bunker in the desert for the experiment to be conducted in. Before we began, Montgomery drew a strange symbol on the table, surrounding the body. It wasn't a pentagram or anything like that, but it was definitely enough to make us consider leaving the project behind. The money was too tempting, however, as it's often hard for a new graduate to get a job immediately. Alan, donning a radiation suit, walked into the room below the cadaver. He set the mixture of liquids onto a small pedestal below the grate and carefully dropped the uranium tablets in. At first, nothing happened. The gas drifted up into the room and surrounded the body. From behind the two-way mirror, it couldn't reach us, but it looked extremely toxic, the way it hissed and sizzled. At that point, we heard a yell and checked the camera that monitored the hall Alan was in. Alan was almost completely gone. His radiation suit had melted from the intense heat, and the rubber had boiled into his skin. It was a horrific sight, and it got everyone but Montgomery into a panic. Montgomery just crouched on the floor and grinned. Sean ran over to him and grabbed him by the neck, shouting profanities at him. But Montgomery was prepared. He pulled a knife from his pocket and stabbed Sean directly in the jugular vein. I almost tackled Montgomery myself, but when I looked up, I noticed something. The body was stirring. It stood on its feet and began to yell. It was a deafening, wordless screech, which completely paralyzed us in fear. Not Montgomery, though. He only laughed. Alan was dead at this point, and this thing had broken the grate and begun to feed on his remains. The hatch to the lower room, however, was directly below our feet. While Jeff and I scrambled to keep that trapdoor closed, Montgomery got up and began to climb out of the bunker. We used Sean's corpse to weigh down the door, but the creature possessed immeasurable strength, and it wouldn't stay down there forever. I began to climb the ladder out of the bunker, and Jeff closely followed. Just as I reached the exit, Jeff made a misstep and sent the whole ladder tumbling down. I'll spare the details of his demise, but there wasn't much blood. He was devoured far too quickly for blood. This, gruesome as it was, gave me a chance to close and lock the exit. Without the ladder, the creature had no way of getting out. I knew that I had won. So, now that you've heard my story, I hope that you can accept my apology. Montgomery is still out there, and I know he's going to attempt his hideous experiment again. That is, if I don't get to him first. If that hatch still opens, he'll be seeing that creature again. Very, very soon. What's up, everybody? Lone Wolf here. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to my narrations of K3 and the Montgomery Experiment. If you did, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new video. If anybody has any personal stories or story recommendations for me, or any advice to help improve the channel, There will be links to all of my social media platforms in the description. I'm mostly active on Twitter and on Instagram, but I also have an email, a Discord server, and a TikTok account that you can message me on as well. Until next time, stay spooky. And remember, the hunt begins when the moon is full. See you soon.